Well, there's plenty of laughter to come on BBC2 shortly with Mel Brooks, Gene Wilder and Madeline Kahn in the hilarious parody of the Hollywood Western Blazing Saddles. And there are some changes to the later part of the evening's schedule on BBC1. In half an hour after the news, we'll be showing a special programme as a tribute to Lord Stockton, who died last night. That's followed at 10:20 by Star Quality with Judi Dench and Ian Holm in the story by Noel Coward, in which Mr. and Mrs. Edgehill take up residence on an island. Barry Norman's personal choice of films of the year can now be seen at 11:40, and the scheduled movie classic Forbidden Planet will now be shown on BBC2 at 11:50, while BBC1 ends the evening with a look at the New Year's honours at 20 past midnight. And that's how we'll be spending the rest of Tuesday evening on BBC1.
The 9 o'clock news from the BBC with Julia Somerville and Andrew Harvey.
Mrs. Thatcher says Lord Stockton was a great statesman, a great person, unique in our affections.
Mr. Gorbachev says there's no point in sending a New Year message to the Americans.
New twists in the Guinness affair. A merchant bank pulls out and a finance director resigns.
Zambia and Zimbabwe threaten sanctions against South Africa.
And game to the last, Britain's ski jumper. Good evening. All day long, the tributes have been pouring in for Lord Stockton, Harold Macmillan as he was, the former Conservative Prime Minister who died last night, aged 92. The messages of appreciation have come from across the political spectrum in Britain and from many parts of the world. Among the tributes from world statesmen, one tonight from President Reagan. Lord Stockton's death, he said, had deprived the world of a voice of wisdom and humanity, the product of a long life of public service. Earlier, Britain's political leaders paid their own tributes to the man who became one of the country's most respected post-war prime ministers and earned the nickname Supermac.
Mrs. Thatcher tonight said Lord Stockton had advised her at the start of the Falklands War. He was an institution, unique in the affections of the British people.
So he was a man of very, very many parts, all of them supremely able, whether it was the compassion, whether it was the depth of his feeling having been through the First World War, whether it was his wisdom as a statesman, or whether it was his knowledge of how to create a very prosperous business. I'm not here to talk about mistakes tonight. I'm only here to honor a person for whose life we are immensely grateful. Immensely. We all make mistakes. And if we didn't, we wouldn't be human. And if we weren't human, we wouldn't be here.
Political foes as well as friends paid their tributes. Harold Wilson, who shadowed Lord Stockton when he was Chancellor, spoke of him as a very old sparring partner. The present Labour leader, Neil Kinnock, said Lord Stockton represented a generation of Tories who recognised duty and pursued the objective of one nation. And for the Liberals, David Steele said Lord Stockton's death marks the end of an era. Lord Hume, who succeeded the then Harold Macmillan as Prime Minister, spoke of his supreme skill in Commons debates. He was a master of the House from the moment he became Prime Minister. Edward Heath, another former Prime Minister but once Macmillan's chief whip, praised his work as an international statesman.
He was the one who started the practical process of détente. Churchill had talked about it, but did not remain Prime Minister long enough. Macmillan carried it through, and it was from his efforts then that we had 15 years of reduction of tension, agreed treaties between the two power blocs, and as a result, many good things, such as the release of large numbers of Jews from the Soviet Union.
It was the Suez Crisis which brought Harold Macmillan to Downing Street, emerging as the Conservative surprise choice as Prime Minister after Sir Anthony Eden resigned. The country was deeply divided. Macmillan's greatest achievement was to revive a demoralised Conservative Party and lead them to another convincing election victory. It was a period of apparent affluence, which was never forgotten, thanks to Macmillan's most famous phrase, which he himself coined.
Well, you're really quite a good position. I remember, but you ought to correct me if I'm wrong, some genial commentator at the time, coined the phrase, which had a certain popularity. I don't know who it was, who said something like, "You never had it so good."
Macmillan had a considerable reputation as an international statesman. His meeting with Khrushchev led to the signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. He was President Kennedy's friend and confidant. Behind the unflappable, dandified image, his shrewd political brain foresaw the shift from colonialism in southern Africa.
The wind of change is blowing through this continent. And whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact, and we must all accept it as a fact.
But in his final years as Prime Minister, things turned sour. Mac the Knife sacked a third of his cabinet in the night of the long knives. The scandal over his war secretary, John Profumo, reflected on him, and he resigned as he went into hospital for an operation. Macmillan's reputation had been badly dented, but in his later years there was a lot of affection for the political giant who'd become a distinguished elder statesman. He kept in the public eye through interviews, and then when he became Earl of Stockton, in House of Lords speeches. They were historic parliamentary occasions. Once he accused the government, by privatisation, of selling the family silver, and he felt very deeply about unemployment.
The unemployment figure was then 29%. Last November, I went to a party there of my friends. The unemployment is 28%. Rather sad end to one's life.
And after the news, there will be a special broadcast of an interview Lord Stockton gave to Ludovic Kennedy in 1983. In it, the former Prime Minister looks back on his long political life and career.
Just over a week ago, politicians from all parties were similarly united in their tributes to another man, David Penhaligon, the Liberal MP killed in a car crash. Today he was buried at the village of Key near Truro in Cornwall. It was a private ceremony for family and close friends. David Steele and other Liberal MPs were among the mourners.
It was at All Hallows Church, St. Key, that David Penhaligon and his wife Annette were married in 1968 and where they worshipped. Today it was filled by some 200 mourners for the private funeral of the man they all knew as the voice of Cornwall. Mrs. Penhaligon was supported by her 14-year-old son, Matthew, and her brother-in-law, John, but was without her 9-year-old daughter, Anna. Liberal leader David Steele and his wife, Judy, were among a dozen leading Alliance members who heard the vicar, a family friend, refer to David Penhaligon's unassailable integrity, intellectual generosity, and infectious gaiety.
In terms of national politics, he was just reaching the stage of a new confidence, having been in the House for 12 years and being accepted as a senior authority and spokesman on behalf of the party. And we will miss him, therefore, very much politically because of that. He was a key part of the architecture of the Liberal Party and of our alliance.
Mr. Steele has already announced there's to be a trust fund to honour the life of David Penhaligon. It will be used to support Cornish causes such as youth employment and the mentally handicapped. And on Saturday week there's to be a public service of thanksgiving when MPs of all parties are likely to attend. It won't be in London, though, but back in the heart of Penhaligon country at Truro Cathedral.
John Francis. The Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has announced that there's to be no exchange of New Year greetings between the superpowers this year. Last year, President Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev took the unprecedented step of addressing each other's nation with a televised message. But today, Mr. Gorbachev turned down the Americans' offer of a repeat performance.
The hopeful new year the two leaders saw emerging at the start of 1986 has yet to materialize. Then both spoke in their televised messages of their desire for peace and trust.
As I face you today, I want to say that Soviet people are dedicated to peace.
And it's my hope that one day we will be able to eliminate these weapons altogether and rely increasingly for our security on defense systems that threaten no one.
For Soviet viewers, it was the first time since 1972 they'd seen an American president talking straight to them. But Mr. Reagan's straight talking, last year he challenged the Soviet leader's views on human rights and Star Wars, is not to be repeated. The Soviet spokesman at today's news conference turned the idea down flat.
Why should we create any illusions about our relations? Reykjavik agreements are not followed.
The Reykjavik summit marked a downturn in relations. Good intentions, according to the Soviet spokesman, do not make a sufficient basis for an exchange of New Year messages. Although the Soviet leadership has been fostering an image of a more open society, Mr. Reagan, it seems, is not to be included in it. This is Brian Hanrahan for the 9 o'clock news in Moscow.
A Polish dissident who spent most of the last 6 years in jail has arrived in Britain tonight for urgent medical treatment. Leszek Maczulski was the founder of KPN, an organisation that was the forerunner of the Solidarity movement in Poland. The decision to allow him to come to Britain is being seen as an attempt by the Polish government to improve relations with the West.
The welcoming party was strangely mixed, and among the Solidarity activists there were campaigners from Afghanistan who've made common cause with the Poles here. The man they'd come to greet emerged with